Hello and welcome to ORF Middle East. Today I'm joined by Senior Colonel Zhou Bo, who has served in senior positions in the PLA and post-retirement he is a senior fellow at Tsinghua University. He is a prolific writer, prolific thinker, author of many articles on China, on Chinese global or Chinese view of the global order, Chinese foreign policy and strategic thinking. And he has just published a book, Should the World Fear China? A very provocative title, but I think a very interesting title that grapples with the big question that the world is facing at the moment, what it means for the world order against the backdrop of a changing dynamic between China and the US, what it means in terms of China's rise and its consequences, and perhaps what it means for Chinese friends and allies and partners in the world who look at China and are also trying to figure out where China is moving and going, and what it also in particular from our point of view means for China-India relationship. So welcome, Colonel, for this conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Professor Pant. Yeah.
I would just begin by asking you this question. So you've titled, the title is Should the World Fear China? Should the world fear China's rise?
The answer is no. This question is raised, actually it's not my idea, it's actually the first question raised by the German magazine Die Zeit to me. He just asked me, tell me, Colonel, should the world fear China? I blah, 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 but then I forgot what I said, but I just remember this question. And I believe in a sense, this question best reflects Western's attitude toward China. China's rise is inexorable, but whether it's fortune or misfortune, that remains a question. But then the thing is, it's not how the West would look at China. Actually, because China is becoming increasingly important, therefore China matters. Yeah, but how China matters, and how could China actually help the world to become a safer place, if not a better place, is becoming a question. I feel about this because I felt that there was actually two turning points after the war in Ukraine. After the war in Ukraine, people immediately came to ask, okay, China, what is your attitude? Which side would you take? Yeah, why won't your president pick up a phone and ask President Putin to stop? I was shocked because I thought, like many other Chinese people, that we were not informed about this war and we did not provide any military assistance to Russia. Why you would come to us to ask us this question as if this is our responsibility? I was wrong because I believe after this war, we in China don't even know how important you have become in the eyes of other people. This is the first turning point. Then the second turning point is after J.D. Vance's speech at Munich Security Conference. Because the world has changed, because the big brother suddenly would stab in the backs of his junior brothers. So this kind of shock is understandable. And then people would again ask me, for example, I could have 4 requests for interviews, all by top international media, to ask, okay, where is China standing? Yeah, because the whole world seems to be moving in another direction. So I think this reflects about China's growing importance, and that, well, of course, would invite China's responsibilities. Yeah, as a big power, of course, you showed greater responsibilities, and that is a price you have to pay as a major power.
So with great power comes great responsibility. That's that certainly has been the dictum. But I think the rise of China, as you mentioned, has been so dramatic and so sweeping in the scale and scope in the last few decades that I think some of the questions that it is generating about China's role in the world perhaps are also very pertinent to ask at this point. That what does China want to do with the power that it has? So if you are to explain this proposition to people who may not know much about China but are interested in knowing, in brief, how would you sum up Chinese global ambitions?
Well, I think China has already passed the first test, that is peaceful rise. Yeah, throughout human history, you can never see another emerging new power rising so peacefully in over 4 decades' time. Yeah, the most unfortunate incident is what happened between China and India, but that is about the sovereignty. I mean, the deadly brawl along the line of actual control. But even in that deadly incident, I still saw something positive. That is, for the two modern militaries, they didn't try to shoot at each other. Yeah, so they were instead fighting with stones. Yeah, at the wood club and these kind of things. That means subconsciously they know they should not shoot at each other in any circumstances. If we look into the future, I would say that overseas, yeah, it is true for me to point out that Chinese PLA soldiers have not killed even a single foreigners. Yeah, so this kind of rise is definitely peaceful. But then the next test would be the real test. That is, even if you become the strongest, how can you behave? Yeah, like a strong power, but not like a hegemon. So this is something, yeah, down the road. So we have to wait and see. But I believe it is still possible. Why? Because of China's, time-tested practice of not killing a foreigner in the last 4 decades, and because of Chinese PLA's operations so far that are essentially humanitarian in nature, be it peacekeeping, counter-piracy, or disaster relief. Therefore, we can be confident that China would not behave like those hegemons in history. So I have some confidence in this.
Colonel, but I think in some ways there has also been some challenge in terms of the projection of power. As all powers rise, their interests expand, right? So in terms of China's global interests, you have a significant degree of interest now across the world, both economic, diplomatic, as well as political. And there has also been some concerns, and you mentioned India's case in particular, but there has also been concerns, for example, in South China Sea or East China Sea, and now, of course, you mentioned Ukraine. There is always a question has been asked whether China would also now take Taiwan, for example, by force. How do you allay, if you are a Chinese decision maker, do you think it's important to allay some of those concerns that, look, China is rising but would continue to rise peacefully? Or do you think this is something that the world will have to live with, that China will grow, and as it grows, it will carry some of these contradictions with it? How do you manage these? How do you balance? How should Beijing balance these challenges that come inevitably with the rising power?
Well, Professor Pant, you are having too many questions, so therefore it's very difficult to give a short answer, but I'll just try my best. When it comes to Taiwan issue, we consider it's our domestic affair as recognized by 180 countries in the world that Taiwan is part of China. So Chinese government right now is still talking about peaceful reunification, which is a good thing, right? So I believe for the rest of the world, it is extremely important for them to convince Chinese government that peaceful reunification is still possible. So if Chinese government is rest assured that peaceful reunification is still possible, it would not think of use of force. So use of force is only considered as a last resort. Yeah. So when it comes to South China Sea, then that is another different issue. China has never claimed that the whole South China Sea is China's sphere of influence. Yeah, but we just believe the rocks and islands are China's, and with all these rocks and islands, it would generate some kind of interest and rights in line with the UN Convention law of the sea. And for PLA to operate elsewhere, the best, examples are just the facts. For example, in counter-piracy, we have been doing counter-piracy since the end of 2008. And we just apprehended pirates, we sent them to courts, and PLA and the Indian Navy have actually been cooperating on this counter-piracy issue. And on many occasions, as the Chinese coordinator for counter-piracy in the Gulf of Aden, I have expressed thanks many times to the Indian Navy for helping relieve the Chinese ship Fuling that was hijacked by pirates.
So if I can talk briefly about the India-China relationship, We know, as you mentioned at the beginning, that there was an unfortunate incident at Galwan, and that has cast a long shadow over the relationship, which were moving in a positive direction before that. So as you look at the challenge that is now in front of India and China to rebuild trust, how hopeful are you that this would be done, given that we have that the two leaders, the leaderships have started a process of reconciling some of their differences, but the strategic distrust remains very high between the two countries. How do you, what advice you would give to the two sides to start building that relationship? Because inevitably, we talk of the Asian century, but that would not happen if India and China are not together in managing the challenges and also taking the opportunities together forward.
First of all, I have to convince all my Indian friends that we didn't try to ambush Indian soldiers, in 2020, because there's no reason for us to do that. First of all, we are eyeing Taiwan Island. For any possible movement in independence, we have to stop that from happening. Secondly, we're under heavy and extreme pressure of having competition with the United States because they take us as a primary competitor. So there is no reason why all of a sudden we would decide to kill some Indian soldiers. So that is impossible. Then why it has happened? There are different stories. But from the Chinese side, given that I myself was in charge of South Asia in the Ministry of National Defense, and I myself have been a negotiator of the China-Indian border, I would say that because this kind of atmosphere start to become sour in April, and from April to mid-June, time was long enough, for the soldiers at the forefront, if they are entangled in this kind of daily, in the sour atmosphere, so something could happen. So this is my explanation. So definitely there is no deliberate intention on the Chinese side to ambush Indian soldiers. This is extremely important for me to point out, because if something happened, deliberately or accidentally, it makes a huge difference, right? So if you believe that we just want to kill you, and for some purposes, then your attitude toward me could be totally changed. So if this is an accident turned incident, which is most unfortunate, I believe both sides should have learned some lessons from this. And I'm confident that because this incident has cost this relationship so much, therefore both sides at the top level should have realized that. And it is up to us to repeat that this should never happen again. And I believe it is possible, because between us, we have more confidence building measures than between China and any other countries. So with this attitude and with this prospect of China, India becoming more and more important in the 18th century, I think this is manageable.
And one of the things that perhaps many in India also often get slightly puzzled with is that China has continued to, for example, privilege Pakistan in its policy over India over the last several decades. And that seems to be slightly puzzling, given that the rest of the world seems to have moved on and seems to be treating India almost, as a global player. Whereas a lot of the times, the conversation with our Chinese friends keeps India pegged or bogged down as a South Asian power. How can we change the parameters of this conversation? Because it is also important from India's perspective, as India also rises in the global hierarchy and in different parameters. As you would have noticed, we are the 5th largest major economy. We will be the 3rd largest. Even if the government of India doesn't do anything, the numbers are stacked in our favor. So in that context, if you look at India's global engagement, global profile, why do you think China has continued to look at India through the South Asian lens rather than looking at it as a regional, as a pan-regional actor?
I think when it comes to this question of Pakistan, this is almost comparable to our relationship with Russia and Ukraine, because Ukraine would also complain about this relationship. Yeah, the reason is because Ukraine's relationship with Russia is bad, and your relationship with Pakistan is not so good. So therefore, if we maintain good relationship with either side, the other side would not be happy. I believe that China-Pakistan relationship certainly has something to do with the sour history between us, as a result of the war. But this kind of mentality is really, really gone, because we understand how important you are. Yeah, even if India can only become what China is today in 2050, and in 5 years' time, you will become the third largest economy in the world. You're not that far away from us in terms of standing. Yeah, so we know your bright future, and we know you have a large but young population, while our population is aging. So that's why we have to spend more effort in developing robots, probably. Yeah. So don't think too much about our relationship with Pakistan. I believe you actually have this is known to the world. You have a bright future, and in the world of tomorrow, probably China and India can do things more together than between China and Pakistan altogether, I would say.
Colonel, I just wanted to briefly touch upon, since we are sitting here in our office in the Middle East, China's role in the region here in the Middle East. And you have, like India, you also have important partnerships with the Arab states in the Gulf. You also have a relationship with Iran, with Israel. How do you look at the present geopolitical environment here in the Middle East, given that you also rely on the region for your energy security, much like we do? And what is it that countries like India and China can contribute when it comes to the present turmoil in the region? Is there a role here for countries like India and China, or are we waiting for the regional players to pick up the slack?
Well, in the past, China was only involved economically, but China is now involved politically and militarily. I say politically because we have mediated the relationship between Saudi and Iran. And we actually have been successful in coordinating among 14 factions of Palestinians in Beijing. And we announced the Beijing Declaration. So militarily speaking, yeah, the area, I mean, the Northern Indian Ocean, basically is part of the Greater Middle East. And our ships have been operating since the end of 2008. So we are already involved militarily, be it counter-piracy or some other things like disaster relief. Yeah. So I think China is already involved. But from Chinese side, we still have some cautions of becoming greatly involved. For example, in the war in Gaza, or even in the Red Sea. But we have some realistic problems, because nobody likes what Houthi is doing. But for us to fight back with missiles against endless drones, the only question is you don't have so many missiles. And for us to make a trip, to resale supply ammunition, you need 1 month. 2 weeks to go back to China, and 2 weeks to come back. So there are realistic problems. So this question is very big. I think even China and the U.S. don't have conflict of interests in this region. And between China and India, I think we have something in common. We rely heavily on oil import from this region. So this region matters tremendously for us. And therefore, the sea lanes in the Northern Indian Ocean would matter tremendously for us. So that is why we still stay there. We have been sending 3 ships nonstop to this region just to make sure that there is no piracy and the international sea lanes are safe. And we have been cooperating in joint efforts to address the piracy issue. So I think China's military presence in the Indian Ocean is a given. Sometimes it makes Indian unhappy, but you just cannot give an example how Chinese Navy is violating any Indian interest or claims in the Indian Ocean.
Finally, before we end this discussion, I thought it would be useful to come to a question which has been haunting now in the world since January, which is Mr. Trump. And it is clearly evident that Trump has targeted China directly with the tariffs and with several other things, but particularly on the tariffs and on the economic side. So when you look at the global order, when you look at Mr. Trump, do you look at Mr. Trump as a temporary phenomena in American politics, or do you look Trumpism now as an underlying feature of America's response to the global order, and therefore China's response is more structurally driven rather than driven by the personality of Mr. Trump?
If you talk to Americans and tell them you are relatively declined, they have to acknowledge it. But they will not be happy if you say you are declined. But my answer this time is the United States is definitely declined. Otherwise, how can American president launch such a tariff war against all countries in the world, right? And actually, who believes in Americans' decline more than anyone? It is Donald Trump. Yeah, he wins the first the term by describing the United States as in carnage. Yeah, and he's the man to make America great again. So the man who believes in American decline the most is Donald Trump. But I would say that I don't know what his next move might be. I can't predict that. But I can assure you, and I believe you would agree with me probably, by the end of his second term, America's global image and credibility will just go down. Yeah, given what he has been doing in a couple of months, and you see the chaos he has created. Yeah, so between China and the United States, we're having tit for tat, and China seems to be the only country who is determined to have tit for tat. So we don't know what kind of consequences it will bring, except to say that the consequences would be grave. I know how difficult it would be for China, but we have no other way out. And I believe we can manage still to have a way out, because the United States still depends on China heavily on some items which they cannot produce. And I believe there could be a time when two sides have to sit down and negotiate. So this is not the end of the world. While at the same time, China is becoming better prepared, because we have learned some lessons from the first term. So China's dependence on American has already decreased. Yeah.
Thank you, Colonel Bo. This was a fascinating discussion with you. I hope we had more time, but good luck with the book, which I'm sure would be a bestseller given the times that we are living in. And congratulations once again. Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you, Professor Pant. Thank you.